We're going to keep talking about that trust deficit with Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire. Senator, I want to start on the shutdown. Thank you for coming on, because you've been part of many of these more quiet bipartisan huddles throughout the last 3 weeks that we pay attention to in the halls of Congress. We've seen Leader Thune float a guaranteed vote, if not a guaranteed outcome, on ACA subsidies. You told me when he did that, no deal. So what's it going to take to shake this loose?
Well, I continue to believe that we can keep the government open and make sure that we're not raising health insurance prices for millions of Americans, about 20 million Americans, and kicking 4 million Americans off of their health insurance because they can't afford the high costs. But the problem is the one that you identified, and that is that there is a trust deficit. And unfortunately, there aren't any official talks going on right now. Yeah. The president's flying off today to Asia. He's going to be gone for about a week. He's met once with the leadership of Congress. That was the day before the shutdown. What we need to see is some real leadership. We need to see people sit down and talk to each other, negotiate, so that we can open up government, so we can address the health care concerns of millions of Americans.
Yeah, and you're one of those senators that still is trying to reach across the aisle. It's unclear that Washington rewards that kind of action, but it's the only way that we're going to get out of this shutdown. I want to talk about the bill that was on the floor yesterday to pay various federal workers, U.S. troops. Of course, it failed, the concern being that it's the government basically picking who feels more or less pain. But there are other bills to ensure, for example, food assistance programs like SNAP don't fully lapse in a few weeks. SNAP has never lapsed during a shutdown. Should Americans expect that they're just going to feel all of the impacts of this, that Congress isn't going to intervene to help various pockets of people who are hurting?
Well, I hope not. I hope saner heads are going to prevail.
But would you vote for the
New
SNAP
Hampshire
bill, for example?
I want to see us come up with an agreement that can open government for everybody, that can address not just SNAP, but the pay cuts that our air traffic controllers are dealing with in New Hampshire. That's going to make sure that we have WIC women and children who get their benefits, because those are going to run out too. And in order to do that, we need to talk to each other. And as you said, I've been in a lot of conversations, as have my colleagues across the aisle. But what's missing in those conversations is leadership saying, we are going to come to the table, we are going to sit down, and we're going to negotiate. When I was governor in New Hampshire and we had a crisis facing the state of New Hampshire, I didn't wait for the speaker to come and see me. I went up to see the Republican speaker. I went to see the Republican Senate president. We sat down and we negotiated on a daily basis for months in order to solve a crisis we had on school funding. So that's what we need to see from our leadership, and that's what the American people expect.
While Congress has been focused on the shutdown, the president's been focused overseas. Israel, Russia, you mentioned he's about to do a week-long trip through parts of Asia. We're going to get to that trip. But first, when it comes to Russia, several bills that you authored passed through committee yesterday that would increase pressure on Putin. Do you have any assurances that those are going to get a vote by the full Senate?
Well, I think they have strong bipartisan support from a broad range of people on the political spectrum. They went through the committee almost unanimously. One would declare Russia a state sponsor of terrorism for their kidnapping of Ukrainian children. One would allow us to use seized Russian assets and provide support to Ukraine with those dollars. And the third would address China's support for Russia's war machine. That's the first legislation going after Russia that we've seen this year in the Foreign Relations Committee. It's long overdue. We need to get it to the floor. We need to take action. Russia needs to understand that we are not going to let them continue to get away with killing innocent Ukrainians without some repercussion.
The reports I've had from people who have gone into the Oval Office and seen him recently are that he is super distracted at the moment, that trying to get him to focus on one particular policy issue is very difficult. He's talking about the renovations of the White House. He's talking about the Lincoln bedroom. He's in, the Pope's brother comes in for a photograph. I mean, he's not a president who is particularly, nailed in, Jeanne, on one particular issue. And I wonder in this, that I don't know how much currency or attention around the country the demolition of the east wing of the White House is getting. But there is something in the juxtaposition. I mean, it's a little bit of a let them eat cake moment where the president is building a massive ballroom that presumably will have lots of gold flashed around in it.
You think?
At the same time as people are not getting their food benefits. And the governor of Virginia is even having to declare a national state of emergency in order to get people to have enough food. I mean, there is something there in the juxtaposition. I don't know if this is something that catches fire, but it seems a pretty odd juxtaposition.
Yeah, you know, governors across the country, I subscribe to a lot of newspapers around the country. I'm an inveterate subscriber. And I was looking at their headlines this morning, and governors everywhere are having to try to step in on the food aid issue, for example, because it's just people are getting hurt. Look, I think those pictures of the East Wing being demolished probably is shocking to a lot of people. Now, I realize that most viewers have, you know, and most Americans have not been inside the White House. They don't, you know, you have, I have, and it was shocking to me, but I think it'll strike a lot of people that way. And yes, there is a contrast. It's for a ballroom. It's for a gigantic ballroom that's going to be festooned with more gold than probably they'll have to, you know, reinforce the floors to hold all the gold at a time.
These bills are important, and you referenced that they're bipartisan, but there have been other bipartisan sanctions-related bills just kind of sitting and waiting in the Senate. What does Republican leadership say to you that they're waiting for to make moves on this, whether it's now on your bills or, for example, the Graham-Blumenthal bill?
Well, what we've heard about the Graham-Blumenthal bill, which would put in place really tough secondary sanctions, and it has over 85 bipartisan sponsors in the Senate. There's nothing that ever gets that many sponsors from both sides of the aisle in the Senate. And unfortunately, what we've heard from Senator Thune, the leader, is that he's not going to move on that bill until he gets a cue from the White House. Well, I think it's time that we take action and not wait for the White House, because what Vladimir Putin has been doing for months now is playing President Trump. Every time President Trump is willing to take some tough action against Russia, Putin calls him on the phone and the action is withdrawn. Now, one exception of that is the sanctions that were just placed on Russia's two largest oil companies, Lukoil and Rosneft. I think that was a very positive move. I hope it's going to have some real impact.
Yeah, a notable change in the posture, though, from the administration. It comes as Trump is set to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines at the APEC conference. What are the hopes that you have, concerns that you have about that high-stakes meeting?
Well, I think China, unfortunately for us, is in a different place than they were in 2018 when the president talked about putting tariffs on the Chinese economy. They are in a stronger position, unfortunately, and I think that makes it harder to negotiate. They have about 90% of the critical minerals and processing of those minerals that the world uses. That puts a real concern on the part of us as we negotiate with them. If the president's talking about 100, and I think the number he floated today was over 100% tariffs on China, then what is that going to mean for the United States if they decide they're going to cut off all the critical minerals that are important to everything from our appliances to our missiles that we use in our defense? So I think these are very high stakes talks that are coming up, and I hope the president is going to have lots of support as he goes into those talks and really understand where the red lines should be and what we can negotiate and what we can be tough about.
Yeah, high stakes from a national security perspective and also from a consumer perspective, because they are ultimately the ones who the costs of those tariffs get passed on to. Last question for you here, Senator. I wanted to get your reaction to these deadly missile strikes on alleged drug boats. This morning, the defense secretary revealed that the U.S. carried out yet another lethal strike. This is the 10th. Listen to what the president said yesterday when he was asked about his authority to conduct these. Listen.
And we will hit them very hard when they come in by land. And they haven't experienced that yet, but now we're totally prepared to do that. We'll probably go back to Congress and explain exactly what we're doing when we come to the land. We don't have to do that, but I think, Marco, I'd like to do that.
How concerned are you about the way that Congress has effectively been left in the dark on these strikes, especially as the president is now talking about moving them to land in some capacity?
Well, I'm very concerned. You know, New Hampshire's had a real issue with the opioid epidemic and with substance misuse. So I think we need to get as tough as possible on drug cartels. But the reality is that the fentanyl that's coming into the United States is not coming from Colombia and Venezuela. It's coming from China through Mexico. The chemicals that are used to make it are coming through Mexico. That's what causes a very high percentage of the deaths in the United States. So we need to be clear about what's going on. People on both sides of the aisle are very concerned about these what are viewed by many as extrajudicial, unlawful attacks against some innocent people. And we've heard from leaders in Latin America who have said that there are innocent people who have been affected. But from our perspective, it's also a huge concern because we don't know how this is going to escalate. And it puts at risk Americans. It puts at risk the men and women in the military who have been stationed down in those parts of Latin America. And that's what we should all be very concerned about. And now the president's talking about taking action on land. And he's admitted that the CIA is in an operation in Venezuela, and he hasn't told us what that operation is. And the Senate Armed Services Committee, which I sit on, we have made a request. Members have asked the chair and ranking member to make a request for the legal basis, the legal doctrine on which these attacks are being made, and who they're aimed at. And we have gotten nothing from anyone after 2 requests for that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of eagerness for that legal justification. We'll leave it there for now. Senator Jeanne Shaheen, thank you. We'll see you out.
The absolute chaos surrounding Washington's latest government shutdown has revealed more than a political stalemate. It's exposed a deep absence of leadership and accountability that now defines the Capitol. For weeks, quiet bipartisan discussions in the halls of Congress have gone absolutely nowhere, as mistrust between both parties continues to widen. Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire describes the crisis as a trust deficit. The parties can't trust each other. This is just too much disingenuous talk on the right. It's of course the right wing. They're the ones who are at fault here. And she described this as a trust deficit between the parties. I would go further than that, but that is an assessment that rings true in Capitol Hill and far beyond. With President Trump departing for a week-long trip to Asia after meeting congressional leaders only once and not even dealing with the still shut down American government, there's no clear signal that any serious negotiations will resume anytime soon. And the stakes are really high. At least 20 million Americans risk higher health insurance costs, and millions more face losing their coverage entirely. Essential programs like SNAP and food benefits, food assistance to vulnerable families, may begin to lapse, something that has never happened during a shutdown. They've said that in November, no one will be getting SNAP. People rely on that for food, to eat, to feed their children. Air traffic controllers, women, minorities, and children who rely on federal benefits are already feeling the effects, and it's going to get much worse. Governors across the country are declaring emergencies to fill the gaps left by Washington's paralysis, while lawmakers argue over symbolic gestures rather than actual solutions. And amidst this domestic gridlock, the administration's foreign agenda even continually grows increasingly erratic, and it's so bad abroad and here. So internationally, while the Senate advances bipartisan bills to hold Russia accountable for kidnapping Ukrainian children and funding its war machine, Republican leadership has delayed votes, waiting for direction from the White House. They gotta hear directly from Trump before they do anything themselves. Completely captured. Trump's inconsistent responses to Vladimir Putin, including moments of apparent reversal after personal calls. Oh, hey Trump, can you just go the other way now? You're on my side again. Oh, yes sir Putin, I'm on your side now. This has only deepened concerns about strategic weakness and Trump's complete inability to actually negotiate between Ukraine and Russia. He just flip-flops. Meanwhile, the president's focus appears scattered through everything. Reports from recent Oval Office visitors describe a distracted leader preoccupied with trivial matters like renovations to the White House and his planned ballroom construction. $300 million, I believe, is going to that, even as millions of Americans struggle without paychecks or food benefits. It's seeming a little bit French, right? He's creating this ballroom, spending hundreds of millions of dollars on it, sending tens of billions of dollars to Argentina while families suffer and starve. It's the perfect image here. Think about this. Millions of Americans going without food, and he's putting up this golden ballroom. It's perfect. Images of the East Wing's demolition have sparked outrage across the country, as it should. It symbolizes this gross excess at a time of national strain and struggle. The politics and the optics of this are really devastating for him. As food insecurity rises and federal workers face uncertainty, the image of a president expanding his residence with gold-trimmed luxury, oh, he's gonna have these gold trims everywhere, probably have gold toilets, that becomes a striking metaphor for the detachment from public suffering. Let them eat cake. Governors and citizens alike see a government consumed by self-interest and spectacle. The current shutdown, once a tactical dispute, has transformed into a vivid reflection of America's leadership crisis. A government unable to govern, full of people who don't seem to do anything, and a president increasingly alone in his decisions, just passing them on down to a Congress who listens to his every word. They can't work by themselves. It's only Trump running the strings, and he has no idea what he's doing.